We are living in a time of great change, and it's critical for us to come together as one human family so that all of our grandchildren, many greats into the future, will be able to enjoy a life here on Mother Earth. May Rematriated Voices create a space within your heart and mind to join with Indigenous thought leaders and allies. We've been brought together for a reason. It's up to all of us to figure out why. Welcome to Rematriated Voices. I'm your host, Michelle Shenandoah, Wolf Clan member of the Oneida Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Haudenosaunee governance supports a matrilineal and matrifocal culture that is rooted in democracy and peacemaking. On this episode of Rematriated Voices, I'm joined by Mohawk Bear Clan mother, Mommabear, Louise McDonald Herne, Mohawk Bear Clan Faithkeeper, Sandra Fox, Onondaga Hawk Clan Chief, Spencer Lyons, and Tuscarora Turtle Clan Chief, Brennen Ferguson. We recorded this episode on a beautiful autumn day by Blue Mountain Lake in the Adirondacks. This is Rematriated Voices. I'm so just really, truly honored to be here with each of you. And I just want to first start out by saying Nyawago to each of you for the responsibilities that you carry for our nations and for our people, and ensuring that our future generations will be able to say that we're Haudenosaunee. So we all know that the recital of our great law of peace can take many days, and it's a very involved story. But for today's purposes, would you briefly describe what is the Great Law of Peace?
The Great Law of Peace is the way that the Haudenosaunee people come to call ourselves Haudenosaunee people. Prior to that, we didn't identify ourselves as people of the Longhouse, but only identified ourselves geographically in where we were all living. So the Great Law of Peace established our traditional governance system and unified the four warring nations at that time, the original 5 nations, and later would be joined by our brothers, the Tuscaroras. And it brought us together in unity and reestablished a mindset of kanikohio, good mind, and peace. And it's what we use today to the structure we still continue to use today to govern ourselves as Haudenosaunee people.
How old is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy?
I myself, I steered clear of trying to date the Haudenosaunee. And this is a question mostly I find that has been asked out of academia. And there's a reason why that they want to date the Haudenosaunee and put a timestamp on our Haudenosaunee and our Great Law of Peace. But when I look back and I listen to some of the things in the teachings, my elders and the ones that are gone already, they use times like 2,000, 3,000 years old, 1,000 years old. And there's various people that will say different things when it comes to the time. But I think for myself, the most important thing is that we still have the values and we are still using the traditional system that was set forth by our ancestors under the Great Law of Peace.
What existed before the Great Law of Peace, and how does that tie back to our women's leadership and how our communities care for one another?
It's really hard to say with any certainty. From what I've heard, it was a time period when the families in the Great Lakes region that became known as the Haudenosaunee, they developed agriculture. And this agriculture helped their families to grow. And when your families grow to a point where you need resources, there's different pressures. And we see that even today, people's competing for resources. And so what happened is it started to be, the young men that were taking it upon themselves to get their parties together and try to use violence rather than diplomacy to acquire different resources and influence. And I think we can see that, throughout our culture, that our people still hold on to that memory. We know that the young men have this tendency for recklessness and chaos. And I've heard that's why when the young boys get their names, it's because we know that they have that potential. And so we sing these songs to them when they get their names as a way to help strengthen their minds and keep them on a good path, even as a little baby, because they have that potential to be kind of chaotic. And I think when the peacemaker did his work, he also recognized that. And that's why he gave the women such a strong role, hoping and understanding that the women would bring balance to that and kind of prevent that type of thing from happening again.
So before the Great Law of Peace, what was the role of women leadership at that time?
So what pre-existed the kind of let go of the Great Law of Peace? And before that big unification happened, there was strife and there was war and there was unrest, and women were not living peacefully. And when a mother can't mother at her fullest capacity, then she's in harm's way. Because right from the get-go, we're a culture of procreators and cultivators, and we had, based upon our food system, colossal cornfields that came along the Mohawk Valley all the way down to the Susquehanna. At the lead of each of those colossal cornfields were corn mothers, and they determined the wealth and the national economy, and they ensured that everybody got their equal share of food. However, when the war and the bloodletting started, it was mayhem, and they couldn't conduct their communities to have abundance and to have food. So I think it's really important to note that, women were fearing for their lives, and women were in hiding. And so the story of the peacemaker's mother and grandmother was they ran from that. And because they ran from that, this baby was born. So women back in the day, that because of the strife and the war-mindedness, some women joined that and they progenited war, as in the character of Jigusese. And she was helping along the bloodletting of the war parties. So back to my point is that when the peacemaker did come and he approached the worst people in the East, on his route he came across a woman who was very vital to the continuation of war, and he presented his message. And because she was a woman who navigated the spirits of men, she also understood that this was kind of like her payback to accept this message, because she's seen the brilliance in it and she wanted something different. And I think in anybody's life, when they know they're on a wrong path, there's that empty feeling and they want to fix it. And so his message conveyed to her that it was a different way and a different life. But it's because of her brilliance, I believe, that she lobbied for women's position inside the foundation of the League, because the women were already the foundation based upon clanship. So I think that pre-existence of the clanship is foundational to what we call the Great Law of Peace. And women are the foundation, and the men came later on to become the walls and the roof to our Confederacy. So I think the brilliance of the peacemaker was he didn't throw the women away, he built upon it. And I think that was so fundamentally necessary in order to build the peace, because he understood that women are peacemakers. And Jigusese became deemed as the mother of all nations and also a peace mother. So, we have that innate ability to call for peace and want peace.
Most people in the United States are unaware that the founding fathers were inspired, to say the least, by the Haudenosaunee, by our form of governance. And they modeled the U.S. Constitution after our form of government. But most Americans are not educated on this history. And so would you highlight some of the parallels between our form of governance and the U.S. government?
Just quickly, I'll say our system vested in the clanship was a deliberate separation of power, which meant that there had to be a process of going back and forth to deliberate the issues. And, there was three sides. And again, you see that in the United States government as it is today. But they're infants. They're little kids on the block.
I think it was at the Treaty of Lancaster, at this treaty signing is when they were proposed, and one of the chiefs stood up at that time and offered that idea, and he told them that they should make a confederation, a union, such as ours, referring to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And in the Articles of Confederation that in Albany, when they started trying to piece this thing together for the forefathers, they were using terms, literal terms from the Haudenosaunee, like Grand Council and all of these different divisions of power that would later on be part of the pillars of the Constitution. It's known for us Haudenosaunee that part of their conflict resolution that's built into the Constitution was influenced by the Haudenosaunee governance system, separation of powers, but even looking deeper and understanding at academic level is the idea of federalism, and this idea where that we have the highest form of government for the Haudenosaunee is the Grand Council, and that the laws or the issues that are passed by the individual nations shouldn't or couldn't supersede what comes out of Kajahawan at the Grand Council. So it kind of showed how this relationship would end up being working with what they call federalism with the states and the federal government. You can look at the back of a quarter and see the eagle holding arrows in unity, and those are direct symbols that come from who we are as Haudenosaunee. And it's just really undeniable from our perspective as Haudenosaunee how much influence the Haudenosaunee had on the founding fathers of the United States. I was even told at a time when they were putting this thing together, they actually had Onondaga Haudenosaunee people in Philadelphia as they were constructing the Constitution, and they would consult with them, and they would say, well, if this happens, how would you resolve that? And again, it goes back to this idea of equity and the way that this relationship that the Haudenosaunee had with the people at that time as they built this thing, the Constitution. But again, I say that it's really obvious for us to see, but it's less obvious the way that history is written, and that part of history has been written out. The Haudenosaunee have been removed from the written history in aspects of how parallel and the balance of powers really are.
So, Spencer, you had talked about symbols that you see on a coin, but are there other symbols that you see that the U.S. government uses that are meaningful to our people, and what do those symbols mean?
For the Haudenosaunee, we understand the way the Great Law of Peace was founded, and when the peacemaker had planted the tree of peace, he placed atop of the tree of peace an eagle, and how significant that was and what that really means, and how that works for the Haudenosaunee is that that eagle is supposed to be ever watching over the entire Confederacy, and is supposed to be a warning. But it's also understood that that might be invested in part of who the title of Tadadaho might be, and how his role to the Confederacy. But you can see the eagle has become a symbol for the United States as well as their national bird. I always found it interesting and kind of funny that Benjamin Franklin was actually advocating for Nitahahwa, a turkey, to be the national bird during his time. And he was obviously, they didn't take the turkey, but he had a lot of admiration for the turkey. And it's funny because even that word means he guards the path. And so obviously the Onondaga people, us as Haudenosaunee, recognize what the turkey does and where that turkey is. But the most obvious is the eagle for the United States, and the parallel for what that means in terms of symbols for the Haudenosaunee.
A lot of people will think that the arrows that are in the eagle's talons actually might mean war, but what do they actually symbolize?
Well, in the story of the coming together, in the unification of the Great League, the peacemaker held up one arrow, and he used it as a metaphor to see if there's only one nation symbolized by one arrow, he could break it. But if he unified 5 arrows together, it was harder to break. So to me, Haudenosaunee are big on symbols, and he used those arrows emblematic to our unification, to say if we all stick together in unity and agreement and cooperation and an understanding of what peace is, without powering each other, but our basic structure is to be founded on peace, then we're a force to be reckoned with.
I also like to expand a little bit, and I think that it was diving deeper and looking at that, it was understood that unity and the power of the mind was more powerful than ruling through physical prowess, which was happening during the time of establishing the Great Law of Peace. And so one of the teachings that I also heard was that the fact that he used leather, sinew or leather, to bound those arrows were also supposed to symbolize our relationship to the natural world at the same time. We also have the idea of the one dish and that wampum belt that exists to talk about why the warring was happening. And again, the sharing of what they call resources. I don't really like the term resources because for me, it's a relationship. Again, relationship to the natural world, knowing that all of those things are living entities. So I can't call it a resource when they're equal to my own life. And so that's just a more symbolism to show what was intended when they were unifying the arrows.
Would you speak about the cultivation and selection of our leaders?
Well, I think leaders, the right of nomination belongs in the women, in the clan women. And young boys are watched over to see the boys grow and which young boy shows leadership. And that's taken care of and cultivated in the character of that young boy. So when a clan mother calls for her right of nomination in a particular clan, bear, wolf, turtle, hawk, that she has to look at how that boy grew up, and was he kind to his elders? Was he helpful? Is he careful with his words, or is he driven on ego? So the ladies would watch and they would confer to see which boy could be a good leader. And it's not one who talks a lot. It's not one who is in the front. And those women look for the guy in the back row in the corner who's listening. And he's got to know how to listen to his people, not campaigning on his own agenda. So I think it's really important that, our leaders are raised and groomed to be in those positions. But, I heard the men talk earlier, and I think, one of the men made a point about how to emulate leadership. And if we're going to connect it to the universal powers, the sun is an excellent symbol of strong masculinity. He knows what his job is, and he does it every day without complaint. And without him, we don't exist. And it's his job to bring a smile to his family, to his people. And it's his job to ensure that we're warm when it's cold. And it's his job to pull the food from the land. So he has an all-inclusive job. And it's a hard one, but he doesn't complain. So those are characters in a leader that women have to look for. One who listens, one who shows up, and one who doesn't complain about his own miseries, but is in perpetual gratitude for what he does have. And I believe that women can really appreciate that kind of masculinity.
Do you also want to talk about clan mothers, how a clan mother comes into her position, and the Faithkeepers as well?
Quickly, it's hard to do anything quickly because it's so intertwined in the fabric of our people. And so a clan mother comes into being according to who her mother and her grandmother is. And the responsibility of a clan mother rests in how many daughters she has, because the work of a clan mother has to carry on. And so those titles are continuous in the women, but the men are borrowed. So when a clan mother appoints a leader and places upon his brow his emblem of authority, to lead his clan and to sit with the other chiefs, she's got to keep an eye on that. So part of that process begins at the time of his birth, and that becomes a lifelong job for a clan mother to guide the leader of the future. And it's also her job to make sure that her daughters know what their job is and that she can pass that down. Now, let's say in the instance she has no daughters, then it would go to her sister's daughters. And then she would take into consultation other clan women within that family to say, well, do you agree with this? Do you not agree? To me, the clan mother is the true representative of the people, and she buffers out the topic. She determines what is domestic. She determines what is a nation issue, and she determines what is international issue. So she has to constantly comb the issues of the discourse of her people from day to day. But she also, again, determines how many babies are going to be born that year. She's in charge of the names. She's in charge of the chiefs' names. There's a lot put upon her, and she's really the center post of a title. And she can, as much as she can nominate, she can also recall her nomination. She really has to keep everybody in check. So it's a super duper heavy, extra, colossal job.
Yeah.
And she can't do it alone. That's why she needs the woven web of women's wisdom constantly surrounding her to ensure that she doesn't stand alone. And that's why those titles are continuous in the woman who has a lot of daughters.
Yeah, and you can see that that certainly is a role and responsibility that was omitted, that was left out of the creation of the U.S. Constitution. And I've heard of accounts where there were the colonists and they just couldn't understand the role of our clan mothers, right? And our clan mothers and chiefs would go to meet with colonists and were almost sometimes maybe ridiculed, like, why are the women here that the men can't come on their own? And they didn't understand this very important aspect that is rooted right within Haudenosaunee governance, right?
I know in my community, again, it starts with the women as well. And all of our communities operate, to suit their own needs. But in my community, I know when a clan mother passes away, all of the women of that clan meet. And they, I don't know exactly how it's done, but the high points that I know of is they, amongst themselves, nominate different ones and put out their names. And they keep on doing this process until it's a unanimous decision on who the next clan mother is going to be. And this has been done for all of our clans at home. And so all of our clan mothers were unanimously selected by the women of their clans. And I think that's really powerful because at the end of the day, everyone at home agrees on who our clan mothers are. And everyone knows that these women were rightfully put in to hold this power that they carry. And it's when a chief falls, it again goes back to the clan mother. And she will meet with all of the women of the clan again and hear their voice on who they want to see put up. In the end, it's her decision and her sole decision, but she has that kind of expectation to meet with all the other women to talk over who they might see fit as a replacement for a chief. And, it's a really significant and important job that they carry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other perspectives?
Yeah, I guess I'll share the clan mothers. I mean, there's different instances in Onondaga and how clan mothers have been chosen, because we have this term, and it's a very sad term in our culture, kapwajia, when a family ends and a family line ends. I'll use the Onondaga Bear clan as an example because, as far as we know, that clan is extinct in Onondaga. That family and that clan line no longer exist for the clan families in Onondaga. And so what happens with those titles, because these titles, in the way there was a process that had happened in the establishment of the Great Law of Peace, and where these hereditary titles, these 50 titles, come from, and how things operate. But it is true, I've heard those same teachings, and those exist in Ganaktigwaniyoge Onondaga, is that when a clan mother passes, first and foremost, it's her daughters, her eldest daughter, who's considered. And if there's nobody in her matrilineal direct line, then it moves to her sisters, her elder sisters, and their daughters, because the way that I understood the teachings that were passed down to me is that there were family lines that had taken care of this. But through colonization, assimilation, being caught between imperial wars, that these things had to evolve in order for us to continue to exist. And so it might not have been exactly the same matrilineal line as the founding of the Confederacy itself. We had asked earlier, well, how old is this thing? Whether, even if it's 1,000 years old, 2,000 years, that's a very long time to think about passing from matrilineal line within even the clan system in itself. So things happened where our ancestors had to make adjustments or concessions maybe, and that could be for better or worse. But we still find ourselves holding the values, and we understand the traditional values and the traditional structures that were handed down when it comes to the way that the responsibilities and people who will have responsibilities are passed down from generation to generation or selected. It was a teaching that I had heard is that we're all leaders. So it's really hard to use the term leader because we're all responsible for our own paths. And so I'm a leader of my own journey, just like they're a leader of their own journeys, just like you're a leader of your journey. And so when we have this idea and it's very tough sometimes to try to fit a narrative that belongs in our language, in using terms like chief, using terms like power, using terms like authority. And from everything, it's about people are chosen to have a responsibility. The person who is a worker, and in the language we would say, the people that have no responsibility, that's a work title. Just like Haudenosaunee or Hoyane, what they call chief, is a work title, and it describes a responsibility, just like Gainete the clan mother, is a work title, and it's all about responsibilities that we have, that what we were after at the establishing of the Great Law of Peace is peace. That peace would exist in all of our communities, all of our clan houses and our longhouses, and within all of our clan families, that we would have peace in general as a society. And so we all have a responsibility. All people have a responsibility to scan out to peace that exists for our people.
Mm-hmm. Would you describe the relationship between a clan mother and her chief? And how does this represent the voice of the people?
I think that'll be a different answer for everyone, right? Because you kind of make that relationship work between the two. So, I can only speak for myself and my experience and the way that my clan mother and I have gone about business. And, it's pretty complicated. She has her regular helpers, and they kind of follow her everywhere, or at least one of them goes with her everywhere. And I also have helpers who, help us carry the bulk of the work. But she and I, we meet very regularly. And anything that comes in on short notice or something of urgency, I'll let one of her helpers know, because she is in her late 80s. She's got good energy, but she is, I'm respectful of the fact to not interrupt her throughout the day when I don't need to. So I do go through her helpers a lot. And she and I will kind of decide on kind of what Louise was talking about, at what level is an issue? Is this an issue that we settle here with the clan, or is this an issue that we need to bring to the council? And is this an issue that we want her and her helpers to take on, or does she want me to take it on? So we have this constant dialogue to deal with all these different issues. At the end of the day, I report to her on basically everything I do. I told her that I was coming here. I told her what was happening. I told her who was going to be here. And anything where there's a decision to be made, I talk to her about it. And it's very rare, but if we come to a point where if we can't come to a place where we agree on how to go, I always defer to her answer. Even if I don't believe it, I defer to her answer because I'm supposed to be carrying her voice. And it's a very effective way to go about business. Everyone, for the most part, feels good about the work being done. Everybody feels heard. We meet with our clan quite frequently. especially when there's big issues that pertain to the whole nation or the whole clan. And we do our best to keep everyone informed. And I do my best to keep her, as involved as I can without being disrespectful to her time.
So for myself, the way that I understand it is through the context of the language used in the Great Law of Peace. And within that context, it says the relationship is supposed to be of mother and son. And so the clan mother is supposed to operate as the chief as her son. The relationship to the people and their representative, their hoyane, also is laid out within the language in itself. And when they're using the language, and they're going through the Great Law of Peace, they say, Agno se sayane, my uncle, you are the chief. And so I always said to my clan family, I said, I'm supposed to be like the cool uncle that you can kind of come and talk to about anything. Like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going I'm going to have that compassion for you. And sometimes, and when I need to, I'll have the words that you may not like, but that you may have to hear. And that relationship, when it comes to the idea of democracy, in discussions within our clan family, I said, this is where the discretion needs to be had and given to the Haudenosaunee, is that I'm the representative for the mindset of the clan within the council. But we have to realize that in Onondaga and everywhere else, there's more than one clan. And so the way that I view it is that the Haudenosaunee are supposed to be like mediators. The clan goes into council knowing that we have an opinion or a mindset maybe as a clan, but within the other 8 clans, they also have a mindset. And that's how we have to come to consensus. Even the idea of consensus might get misconstrued in the way that I understand consensus and the way others understand consensus. It would be a really long process to get 100% agreement and for people to just see eye to eye and say yes about everything. My understanding about consensus isn't 100% agreement, but 100% understanding. And we also have this aspect, what we call the protocol or mandate to peace. Because in the language, we say, we can never pull apart our minds or separate our minds. We can only have one mind. And that's when you move forward in any process, is when you're of one mind. And so this idea is that if you have this idea of consensus, an idea of understanding, of thorough understanding on all sides, if the majority sees that it should go one way and there's one person standing in opposite side, they're supposed to continue to confer and go over that. And there's a process that's built into the Great Law of Peace to say there is a time that things will move forward, but at least that all sides of the issue have been looked at. And then some people say, well, both sides of the coin, but that's rarely the case. It's more like all sides of the dice in most situations. But that's the idea, that to make sure that we're governing in balance, but at the same time that we understand how we move forward.
I just want to add real quick, the relationship between a clan mother and her chief, I think that's one of the hidden roots of democracy, is that there has to be consultation. And I know in Grand Council, my own chief, if they're stuck on an issue, he'll get up and he'll walk to the women's side of the house and he'll say, what do you think about this issue? You don't see that too often, but our Mohawk chiefs do that because they know if they don't consult with us, they'll be hell to pay when they get home. No, but on a serious note, like, to me, that's just a gesture of decency to include the women, especially if a decision's being deliberated or being made that's going to affect them. And sometimes women just have a different perspective on issues and matters that ain't like a man. And so to me, that's the integrity of the chief, to get up and come over and ask the women, well, what do you think about this? And it was written in history where General Proctor, who was a general under Washington's command, who was meeting with the Six Nation chiefs somewhere near Albany, and he came over a hill and he seen all the Six Nations chiefs sitting around a tree, and there was a woman sitting next to each one of them, and in his Eurocentric mind, thought that was a spectacle because he could not comprehend in his own ways how a woman could even have a political thought.
The leadership is on the span of a hand, and so you have your chief, and he has a sub-chief, and then there's a female faithkeeper and a male faithkeeper. And so, Sandra, you are a Bear Clan female
Community Faithkeeper, they call it.
faithkeeper, community faithkeeper.
And Louise has one that would be under her title.
Yeah.
And that one would help her with meetings or whatever. She helps her, that faithkeeper, and the man helps her, Lyons, with wood, getting the meeting together, whatever. They do that kind of stuff. But what I am is I'm a faithkeeper within the ceremonies. So I just keep that going. That's my job. But we work with them too. We try to work together.
So do you see a comparable role? Like within the U.S. culture, they structured so much of their government based on what they saw. Is this a role that you see in the U.S. government in any way?
I really thought about that and I couldn't find one. I couldn't find nothing that would be similar.
So how do you think that that might be a detriment to, say, the U.S. government in the fact that they didn't include the role of a clan mother, they didn't include this role of faithkeepers, those were taken out, right? And the U.S. Constitution was really created for white land-owning men, right? So what have they missed out on?
A law. Because we live in harmony. And I don't know how they do it when they don't include women. You know, like I don't understand it. Because the women is the foundation of families. And the families are what brings all the people here. You know, that's how we're here. And they didn't think it was important. But our ways, we're all connected and everybody's connected. They have different titles or jobs or whatever, but we're all interconnected. That's why it's so hard to bring up one issue, because it's all connected and there's a lot to it. And most of it's living it. It's like, that's what it is. Nowadays, it's like, can you live it? And I can see we're trying to live it by bringing back our seeds, bringing back our songs, which we almost lost. And that's what our job it is, faith keepers, to keep it going, to bring that teachings back, but to live it. Because it doesn't mean nothing if you're not doing it. And I see we're trying to do it by what we're doing here. People are going to see this. They're going to say, maybe that's what's going to wake them up. Because it's what he said. He says, everybody's got responsibility. We do. And that's what's not functioning, is the people's responsibility. They don't know their responsibility. Like, we can do all the work, but we have to work hard. It was meant for people to work together. And we'll still do that, even no matter what goes on. Our people still have that in us to do that work together, help each other, even no matter how much dysfunction we have. And it wasn't our fault we have dysfunction, but we got to deal with that every day. And it's still ongoing. It's hard to address that because people have so much hurt. So we can't get to the real things because it's all emotional. And it's not our fault. We are awesome. That we can pull together like this and still do all this stuff. And we still have this land. We still have this air, the water. I mean, that's so awesome. I don't know. That's how I feel about everything.
What are some misconceptions about our chiefs?
That they're higher than the people.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. This idea of hierarchy Or again, like what I had mentioned, the idea of authority over people. Even the term chief implies that there is a hierarchy and there are people below a chief, and that the chief's going to point and do. And it's really simple, and I feel like Ongohoa in general and a lot of our teachings, we were very practical. We're a very practical people. And I always think to myself in my own work, in my own community, is that authority or delegation of powers only works when you're working too. And so you have to not be afraid to go and be in the field with the people, or be in the grind with the people, or bring them along with them too. Bring them along with you so they can see. So there's a lot of misconceptions that I feel like chiefs live above the people, or are above, or put on a pedestal. And maybe that's happened in instances, but was never the intention when the peacemaker brought this thing together.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll add, it's kind of from a different perspective, is there's this misconception I see sometimes where people think that there's like a perfect way to be a chief or a perfect way to be a clan mother. And it's pretty upsetting, especially when they're kind of ridiculing our leaders of the past, because we don't know the pressures that they had faced at that time, and we know that it was worse than it is now, and we don't know what their circumstance was. But what I do know is, and what I hope, is that whatever their circumstance was, that they did their best with what they knew and what they had at the time. There was, a long period of time where our very existence was in question. And when chiefs are raised, they're given specific instructions, and the number one instruction is to look towards the future, right? Our vision is supposed to pierce deep within the earth, meaning those future generations are also included in our thinking. And so I think about that, because those chiefs at that time and those clan mothers during a time of great uncertainty, they did their best hoping that their people would have a future. And here we all are today, and we still have our nations, and we still have our languages. We still have our ceremonies, we still have our clans. And so they did a lot of really good work in a hard time to make sure that we would still have all of these things.
Mm-hmm. What are the reasons a chief could be removed from his position?
When he self-agendas, when he's not listening to the clan or the clan mother, and he's kind of like making decisions on his own, and he is trying to make deals or agreements without the full consent of his clan, or if he's not acting according to what an honorable man should be. Like, is he out of town? Is he with other women? Is he respecting his wife and his family? There's multiple reasons. Or if he commits murder, if he commits rape, if he steals, I think those are some of the infractions for the removal of a chief. Or a loyane. I hate to use the word chief too, because it implies that he's above others. But, to remove a chief, some of the laws are clear what the infractions are, and then others can get skewed up in rhetoric and, what is the law, back and forth. But to me, if he doesn't have decency and respect for the people he's representing, then, you need to remove him.
Yeah, and it's the clan mother, right? His clan mother who has the right to remove him.
That's right.
Yeah. So, who calls for war? Who calls for peace? And why?
Well, what I heard, and I don't want to be the one answering here all the time, so I'm going silent on some of this, is that because the women have to make the moccasins of the warriors to go to war, it is up to them, and they got to prepare their food. It is up to them to decide whether they're going to make those moccasins or not. And that the mother will also decide, do I want to give the life of my son to a war where he might not come back? So it rests with the women, because she's got to carry the grief if he dies in that war. Even in the Oneidas, in the Battle of Oriskany, it was the women who made the decision to fight on the American side. because they believed that the loyalty of the United States would ever protect the Oneidas. And they got betrayed, and the women got betrayed. But, it's the women who really carry the grief and who will suffer the pain of loss if our men die at war.
I think just going through some of the historical context too that we've been mentioning, that there are a lot of different instances, and if we look at the way that the Great Law of Peace was functioning through historical context, when I refer to historical context, I'm referring to the written history. The Great Law of Peace was existing in different ways through contact, through the 1600s, through the 1700s, through the 1800s, and even today. We see and we still engage with the Great Law of Peace and through different parts of it that have changed over time. If we look back at the founding of the Confederacy and all the work the peacemaker had done at that time, I think we're all supposed to want peace. All the people, Haudenosaunee, Haudenosaunee, everybody is supposed to be petitioning for peace. And it was also something that I really struck a chord with me, or rung a bell, that said that in order to get peace, sometimes you have to rebalance responsibilities. And sometimes when we don't have that, in order to get back there, it's like, well, what does justice mean? If they're calling this the Great Law of Peace, I've been asked, well, what is Ongwahoma justice? What is Indian justice? And it's a rebalancing of responsibilities, really, that there's this give and take. But also when we look at the women through the historical writings, they were asked whether the men would go out or not. Like, there was this understanding that this was going to affect everybody. Another thing that I had read was that they didn't really engage in too many things where they couldn't see the outcome, like a thorough outcome. So they didn't go into things blindly. And I think that goes back to that relationship where men are eager sometimes and be like, yeah, we're going to show how much of a Hosgagita I am. I'm going to go out there and be the hardest lacrosse player, be the hardest warrior. But at the same time, there's that mother to pull back her son and say, okay, think about these things. But everything was in balance. Everything should be considered. All those people, the other things that we think about, that I think about, is that within the traditional context and the language context of the Great Law of Peace itself, when we're referring to what people can be removed from responsibility for. Another major thing that I think gets left out is arson, because of our belief that a house or a dwelling has a life in itself. But even within the strings of condolence, then they talk about the De Wasania Wifwage, the 20 matters. That was a way to address those types of things about how to replace a life, or things that would address what was more particular about the law in itself. And those things have changed also over time, and the way that it's presented now when we're installing our Haudenosaunee and uplifting our clan families into new responsibilities and how they're going to move forward. That language is contained within that, and it was different in the past. They had it more full, where they knew exactly what all 20 matters were, and now they kind of gloss over it, but that contains those teachings of what that is for removal, or what is against the law, so to say. But it was also dealing with grief and replacement of life, because we know part of who we are fundamentally is about adoption. The Great Law in itself is about adoption. When we think about 5 different warring families, the peacemaker says, Oneskadatne and Dadnukwa. Now we're all one family. Now we recognize each other and establish a relationship of brothers and sisters and come together as one family. And so there's this dynamic that happens within our governance system that is supposed to be there for us today still.
When new leaders are installed, why is it called a condolence? And what does grief and loss have to do with installing our new leaders?
When a chief falls, that clan mother or that clan has 3 days in order to raise a new leader again. And it's called a condolence because you're dealing with the loss of that chief through death. And so you're grieving the loss of that pillar that was there for you. So it's to condole the minds of the ones who are still here, to bring some kind of understanding and peace and comfort to the family that still remains. And it's about condoling the other side of the house. It's about standing in recognition of what that person's lifetime in both a clan mother and a chief, that, you know, what they stood for. And it's to address the grief and just to offer that comfort.
One of my teachers had said at one time, he said, I don't know why they call it a condolence and why they say we're condoling these person. And it's true, everything that Mommabear had said, and about the way that it addresses the one who had passed on and addressing grief and loss for the entire Confederacy, really. And he said, but everybody in there was technically condoled. So he didn't understand. He said, I don't understand why they say, well, this guy's condoled, or that guy's condoled, or this grandmother's condoled, or these people are condoled and they're not condoled. It's like, well, everybody who went through that process was given those words of condolence and recognition that this was a loss for the entire Confederacy. Studying the actual language and the process that this ceremony, how it takes place and the words within it, it's also a lament to our ancestors to understand the condition that we find ourselves in as an entire Confederacy. And it gives recognition to all of the work that all of the Haudenosaunee in the past, right from the founding of the very first ones to ever hold these Confederacy title names, right to that one that had just passed and right to the new one. And it's a lament and an ask, and it's an understanding of the condition of the Confederacy at that moment in time, and to know and reestablish and reground ourselves in the meaning of Gainasagona, of what they call the Great Peace, or the Great Law of Peace.
Knowing that the United States modeled its Constitution after our form of governance as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, we know we've been here a very long time as a confederacy of United Nations in peace. And whether that's 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, we know it's really, really quite old. And it's all centered around peace. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy is the oldest continuous democracy on Earth, as far as I know. Maybe you know something different or have heard something different. But what's interesting is most Americans, most U.S. citizens don't know this information. They don't know this truth, this influence that our people had on those founding fathers. What is the greatest lesson that people can learn from the Haudenosaunee about governance and leadership?
Automatically, the first thing that comes to my mind is the way again, we talked about parallels between the Haudenosaunee and the U.S. democracy. And they're so ready to say power of the people, or power is invested in the people. But yet we look at the outside process, and the power really isn't invested in the people when choosing a leader, but more so now the electoral votes in the electoral system and the interest that has been able to influence those electoral system. And so I think that we still have a process that involves heavily the people in itself as Haudenosaunee. And I think for myself, I would think that that's one thing that would be able to influence on the outside or guide governance a little bit stronger, would be to invest more into the people, into the true power of the people, or into the voices of those people.
For me, it's like, the United States in its founding lived in the Indian world. It lived in Indian world, and that's how influential and present we were at the time of their confederation. And there was a recent article that came out that indigenous nations were supposed to be considered the 14th colony. They were supposed to be unified under that confederation. But our leaders at the time refused it because they didn't include the women. And so what people need to know, that The United States Constitution even mentions Indians in its first paragraph. It's an acknowledgement that there was something pre-existing here that predates them. And, to bring it home in a way is to have them know that as much as they copied our system, they also then follow it to a T, and that they themselves left out the mother. So they're a motherless country because the founding fathers failed to acknowledge the true power of the land. And I think that falsehood needs to be unearthed, and to have them understand there was founding mothers here, and that women were very integral and a very big part of all of that union making. And as a matter of fact, if you go back on the historical records, they wouldn't start a meeting between the Six Nations chiefs or any Indian nation unless there was an exchange of belts. And those belts were beaded by the hands and fingers of women because they were the historical recorders of those meetings and of those treaty makings and those agreements, and all that got recorded in wampum belts. And we know that through Ben Franklin's essay, that he says, I've never seen even though we call them savages, I've never seen a more sophisticated society because they're organized, they arrive on time, and then when the old guys in front can't remember, they defer to the young guys in the back who defer to the third row, which is the women, because the women never forgot. Because they wove the symbols into the belts. And so the historical record clearly shows that there was an exchange of the recording of those minutes through our wampum belts.
Yeah, actually, Franklin said in that writing, because we looked at it together, and the Philosophical Society, the archive in Philadelphia, and Ben Franklin said that the women could recall the details of a treaty greater than the colonists could, even going back 100 years. They were always able to recall all the details. And when they'd go back to check the record, it was always accurate. And that right there is a testament to oral tradition. It's alive, it's living. This is why we know all this history, and it's not just on a book on the shelf that you have to go back and refer to and dust it off, because it's living knowledge. Yeah. What's the greatest lesson you believe that people can learn from the Haudenosaunee about leadership and governance?
I think it's structure, because we have a structure to it where people know where they fit, how they can help, because we include everybody. Everybody's included. And we still use that, as far as I can see. We still have the youngest to the oldest still all working together. And we still include them. Where the U.S. government or whatever, I don't see that. I see it's man-run, mostly. That's all I see. I don't see no one working together.
I think one thing that could benefit, American society is and this is coming out of our law, right? Because our treaties are an extension of the Great Law. Well, the one dish wampum is a law that we have to share. And, in what other country is there a law that you have to share with each other? That's kind of a bigger discussion, relating it to colonialism and capitalism. Is it the same issue? Is it two sides to the same coin? They definitely go hand in hand. And we hear a lot of talk about decolonization, and I'm kind of talking to our own people now. We hear a lot of talk about decolonization and asking how can we decolonize, learning language, planting. Another huge avenue for decolonization is sharing with each other. Sharing your time, sharing your energy, sharing anything that you have that could help somebody else. That's decolonizing, is sharing with each other.
One of the things that we do as Haudenosaunee for any of our gatherings, for our ceremonies, we have lots of protocols very, very organized, very structured. And one of those is the Thanksgiving address, also called the opening address. And would you explain what is the Thanksgiving address and why do we do this?
The Thanksgiving address, it's a cultural protocol whenever we have a gathering, a ceremony, a political meeting. And what we're doing is we're first greeting and acknowledging everyone that had showed up to our gathering place. And we're offering words of greetings, but also gratitude that they made it in a safe and they made it healthy and that they had a good road. And from that point, we extend that greetings and acknowledgement and that gratitude to all people of the earth, understanding, as Spencer has said repeatedly, that we all have equal value. And from that point, we kind of spend our time going through the different levels of creation, starting with our Mother Earth. And we acknowledge her and we give her gratitude that she continues her duties and recognizing that we depend on her. And we go through all these different segments of creation, the grasses, the animals, the berries, the medicines, the trees. And we keep going up into the sky and our relatives in the sky being the moon, the stars, the sun. And we finish in the Creator's land, greeting and acknowledging his helpers, the four protectors, as well as himself. Extending that same gratitude and greetings and recognizing that we're dependent on all of these things. And I think, the practical use of it in our more intimate settings, it's just a reminder for us and it's grounding us. But I think something that's really kind of significant is we also do this when we meet with political delegations from other places, people that we have work to do, and people that we might not have fully agree on things. And certainly when we meet with folks that aren't Native, we see the world and we prioritize things differently. But by doing this practice, we're starting the conversation by having already agreed on what we value most, and that being each other, our Mother, the Earth, and all the segments of creation and our place in creation. Before we get into any conflict or discussion, we start with acknowledging our shared humanity and by acknowledging what we value most as people.
Who's considered? When you make decisions, who's considered?
Everybody.
Everybody.
All of creation. Even the ancestors and the ones who weren't born yet.
Mm-hmm.
So from the past to the present to the future, from the heart of the earth to the heart of the sky, we're a universal family, and we're like what she expressed so great is we're all connected. We're all connected.
Yeah. And what about young people, their voice and decisions?
I think they're so important. I think that's where everything seems to be going focused towards. And it's real hard because we have technology, and the young people are doing that technology, and that's not living. That's what's hard for me, because I can't understand it. I don't know it. And I just know it doesn't feel real to me. And I see my grandkids, my great-grandkids, all on that. And I says, you're not even doing nothing real. There's nothing real in what you're doing. You're just wasting your life. It seems to me that's what, because they're not doing nothing with what's here, what was put here for us to live. How's that camera going to feed them, really? Or talk to them, hold them when they feel sad? I just hear all this anxiety all these kids are going through. And I can understand because it's not living. And that's what their daily life is. So any chance I get, I always talk to my grandkids, my great-grandkids about this stuff. Look at the tree. Look at the ground. We still have that. We still have water. Let's go outside. Go outside. Give me your phone. Put it away. Go outside and play. I want them to connect with the earth. Run, play, have fun. I understand what it's about and everything, like for everyday living, for people now. But I don't know what kind of future they're going to have because they're not relying on, they're supposed to be taking care of the earth. That's what it was here. That's why we give the Thanksgiving, to remind us that this is still here. This is what was put here for us. And if we acknowledge all those things and we use it, that'll keep us healthy. We'll be okay, you know. So what are my grandkids learning?
I want to add a little bit too in context to our children and the youth. Within ceremony in Onondaga, there's a particular phrase that's used, and it says to listen to the dreams of the children. And when we think about dreams in the context of Haudenosaunee, it isn't just when we're asleep. It's a thought, it's a daydream, it's where your mind wanders when you're not presently doing whatever task you're doing. And in our language and our understanding culturally, as that's what a dream can be. So when they're saying listen to the dreams of your children, I was always taught that the dreams of the children are just as an important aspect as and perspective as the elders' dreams and as the elders' voice, and that we need to be listening to both ends of that. I was fortunate enough to share space recently with an elder, and she was Anishinaabe, and she had said, the future belongs to the younger generations, but the future is also now. And it also reminded me of some recent history that some of my friends who are historians, and they had mentioned this context of in the 1600s, that even the elders then were saying that, well, all these young people just want to change our culture and they're changing it, and these warriors and these young men are changing it. And it made me think to connect these two ideas. At first they give me peace because I said, okay, well, that's what our elder generations are saying about our younger generations right now. Oh, these guys just want to change it. They're changing it. Everything's changing so fast. But it was an elder, Tom Porter, had said that if you don't evolve, then you die. Then you go extinct, and that there has to be some kind of evolution. And in my mindset, when I had heard these three different aspects and all these perspectives, I started to analyze and start to think, okay, then what is the responsibility for these younger generations and these older generations to work together? How does that function, and how do they move forward together? And what is the responsibility of us who are kind of in the middle or who are boots on the ground right now? Is that the elders are responsible to make sure that there's a bridge between these younger generations and making sure that the values and all the work and all the things that they had to endure, then it's the guys in the boots on the ground and the people doing the work for the Confederacy and just us existing as Haudenosaunee. It's us to help to be the bridge for these younger generations that are living in the now and that have also been brought up by the elder generations who are the elders at that moment, at this time. That we all have this responsibility to create this cohesive future together. That there is a responsibility and a relationship, but it's also true, like I see within our communities that bridge is, I don't want to say it's not there, but it might be weak at the moment. But that's the responsibility that we have to each other as the elders and the youngers, as the youth, is to empower our children to stand in their voice, to stand in their light, to give them, to make sure they have a road to walk, and to give them that platform to use their voice when it's time. Make sure they have a solid foundation and them understanding to know what it means to be Haudenosaunee. So when it comes time for them to use their tablets and use their skill sets that they're developing now, that it promotes a future of existence for us, for that Scano, for that peace to exist for them.
I want to add, because I think this is important about the youth, because it's a dream, a prophetic dream that came from our elder, Sagogwenyugwas, probably a decade ago. And he said there'll come a day when the eyes of the world will be upon us, and those children will have something important to say. And they'll step as youth into the roles of our leaders, and they'll be 7 times more powerful than we have ever imagined ourselves to be.
You say something often that I find really beautiful, and you say that the Haudenosaunee are the pearl to the world.
We're the pearl to the world.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge that each of you, you were selected for the positions that you have. You didn't decide, I'm going to go run for office and go convince millions of people to select me. You were selected based on the attributes of who you are as a human being, and that you had community watching you your whole lives. And so when you accepted these positions, it's a lifetime position.
It's a lifetime position, and you're not paid for it.
And you're not paid for it. Yeah. And it's a responsibility to the people and to carrying on in our way of life. That's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Yeah.
It's only a lifetime position unless you break the law.
Or you don't do it, your duties.
And I say to my people, it is you I serve. I'm not your servant, but it is you I serve. And I don't know what you need until you tell me.
I would just respond, I guess, by saying, it is, a responsibility and a lifetime responsibility, but everybody has a lifetime responsibility if this is going to work well. It's not just on leadership, we rely on everybody. As much as the people rely on us, we rely on them. And so we all have that lifetime responsibility to make sure that this continues into the future.
It's beautiful. Now I'll go to each of you. Really just so grateful for all that you do and for sharing your time, sharing your knowledge today. I really, really appreciate it. I'm so thankful. And so with that, I just want to say, now I go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rematriated Voices was recorded on Mohawk land at Minnowbrook Conference Center overlooking Blue Mountain Lake in the Adirondack Mountains. It's a collaboration between Rematriation and Access Audio from the Special Collections Research Center at Syracuse University Libraries. It was produced by me, Michelle Shenandoah, and Jim O'Connor. Audio recording and mixing by Brett Berry at Silver Hollow Audio on Lenape land in the Catskills. Executive Production Assistant, Catherine Farrow. Production Assistants, Jalen Jimerson, Pamela Pembleton, and Corinne Miller. Sound Assistants, Griffin O'Neill and Olivia Peters. Cultural and Storytelling Consultants, Rachel Porter, Gudgy Judy Fox, and Neil Powless. Research Assistant, Nada Morgani. Energy Healer, Christina Porter. Theme Song, Healing Song by Bear Fox and Teoswate. Now I go. A big thank you to Chancellor Kent Severud, Candace Campbell-Jackson, and Patricia Delante from the Office of the Chancellor at Syracuse University. Similar thanks to Nicolette Dobrovolsky and Courtney Hicks of the Special Collections Research Center, and Aileen Gallagher and John Glass of the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications, and a special thanks to Linda Paris of the Open Societies Foundations. Vocal coaching by Joanne Yarrow of Distinctive Voices. Koyahane.